excited to have our question and answer session with Suzanne Johnson today. So we're going to start off with turning it over to Suzanne. Do you want to speak first, or do you want people to start peppering you?
Just pepper away. I will say I've got an urban fantasy series coming out this year and next year with 4 books, and a paranormal romance series under the name Susanna Sandlin that's coming out this year with Mott Lake Romance. So I don't recommend doing 2 series at once if anybody's considering it. It's crazy.
I second that.
It is crazy. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, who wants to go first? Mary?
How do you differentiate between the romance and urban fantasy?
They're very closely intertwined. It's basically what is at the heart of your story. How does your story wrap up? If your story wraps up by solving a mystery, it's probably urban fantasy. If it wraps up by a happily for now, it's probably paranormal romance. So if you have like a shifting point of view between a male and a female, it's going to be paranormal romance. Whereas urban fantasy is often carried through the same point of view throughout. Although when I started my paranormal romance series, one reason I started it was to experiment with multiple points of view, and I have 6 POV characters in the romance.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so that. Yeah. But it's basically what's at the heart of your story that differentiates them.
I've got a question.
Okay.
You've got great world building in your books. What do you do to keep up with the world you've built? Do you keep a story Bible, or how do you keep up with everything?
I didn't know to do that when I started. So after I finished the second book, and I found myself spending a lot of time going back into the first manuscript trying to check things, I hired a college student, which is one of the benefits of working at a university. So I hired a college student in the English department to read the books and create a story Bible. So it's on a document that's searchable, and that has saved a lot of time. I highly recommend it if you're doing a series.
Now, what all do you put in your Bible? I've always wondered, what all?
I put things like, I have this little notebook here where I start. I have maps of my physical world that I scan and put in there, so I know how it's set up and I'm consistent. Character names. In my New Orleans series, my protagonist is a wizard, and she does a lot of rituals and potions. So I need to make note of what she calls them and what ingredients she puts in them. Specific things, physical descriptions of characters, so that, you don't accidentally make them. Yes, Alex. Exactly, or Alex doesn't shrink 2 inches between from book to book. So anything factual like that.
Can you take us through the lifespan of Royal Street from the conception of the idea to getting it on shelves?
Yeah, it was a long process. For those of you who aren't familiar with Royal Street, it takes place in New Orleans at the time of Hurricane Katrina. I was living in New Orleans at the time of Hurricane Katrina. So I used a lot of my personal experience. Actually, the whole book got started after I moved to Auburn, and I was going through a lot of homesickness and withdrawal, if you will, from the whole Katrina thing, because for 2 years after the storm, we had built everything around trying to rebuild after the storm. And then I picked up a book that was written by a couple of well-known urban fantasy authors that was set in post-Katrina New Orleans, and they got it all wrong. They just infuriated me. So I thought, well, let me try it. So I really just started as a personal project to kind of get rid of some post-traumatic stress. It probably took me 5 or 6 months to write it, because I'd never even thought about writing a novel up until that point. And I entered it in the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award competition in spring of 2010. And was it spring of 2009? I think it was 09. And it made the semifinals, which is like the top 200, so I mean, it wasn't like huge. But it made me think, well, maybe there's something here. And as part of that, I got a Publishers Weekly little mini review that said, how flat all of the secondary characters were, and how the plot kind of wandered a little bit. So I took that to heart, and I sat down and completely rewrote it. I started submitting it to agents, I think in around May or June of 2009, and got the agent in July. And in November of 2009, she sold a series to tour of 2 books. By the time she sold it, I had written the second book. Later, we signed a contract for a third book. Once we went through the revision process, and being my first book, it needed a lot of work, so we went through like 2 rounds of revisions. We sent it out to some authors to get blurbs back, and they came back very positive. And I think at that point, the powers that be at tour sat down and said, well, we want to give this a little bigger push than we initially thought, and so they bumped it 6 months on the calendar. So it ended up being a good reason.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, Thor is pretty big, right?
Yeah, they're huge, and they were. They've been really great because they sent me on a book tour, which doesn't happen. They're in agreement to do a series of shorts for tour that will be released digitally between books that'll focus on the undead pirate genre beat. So,
They just make that up.
a lot of it I make up, but I read a lot of paranormal, so like if I'm dealing with wizards, I have to take, I think there's a certain expectation with wizards, and then you take whatever the baseline expectations are and then start modifying. The Paranormal Romance series is a vampire series, and so do your vampires glitter in the sun? Mine don't. But those are the things you have to ask. Which of these kind of stereotypes of a certain paranormal character are you going to keep, and which ones are you going to flip on their heads? And to be able to do that, I think you have to have read at least a pretty good grounding in whatever those characters are. In my New Orleans series, the second book, which comes out in November, has mer people in it. And so I had to decide, okay, if I'm going to have mermen, what of that kind of mythos do I want to keep? And so obviously they have to be aquatic, but I decided that my mer people would be shapeshifters. So they can either partially change into a classic merman form or mermaid form, or they can fully shift into a fish, a big fish.
That could explain the whole sex thing then.
It really does, and then I decided to make them Cajuns. So all Tor did was say, what do you not want to see on the covers? And so I said, well,
That's harder than saying what you want to
in some ways, except, urban fantasy covers have gotten so stereotypical. So I said, I don't want a redhead with tattoos.
And only her back.
I don't want a tramp stamp. I don't want a bustier. I don't want leather anywhere. And so they honored that. They have her in a tank top. Although I noticed in the second book, the tank top got a lot skimpier. So they can't help themselves. On the Paranormal Romance series, they actually asked me what I liked and to give them some samples of covers that I liked. And
That's cool.
Yeah, so Paranormal Romance, the stereotype is the fab abs, as I call them, the guy with the head cut off and just the bare chest.
Maybe some hands on it.
Maybe some hands, maybe some tattoos stamped on. So it said, put a face. And so, yeah, so
What a novel idea.
it was. So, I love Jim Butcher. His Dresden Files series is fabulous. Kim Harrison's Hollows series is a favorite. Patricia Briggs' Mercy Thompson series is awesome. And I am a huge Black Dagger Brotherhood fan. So, J.R. Ward. And Janine Frost, Cat and Bones Night Huntress series is really good.